Things aren't going well in America. I think everyone can just feel it. Like we're kind of at the end of an empire phase. To me, what symbolized it more than anything, even though it wasn't by itself a major event, was the gay guy in the Capitol having anal sex. He's making a movie in the Capitol. To me, that symbolized where we are as a country that was founded by Christians, really good people. And now we're in a late stage of an empire type of situation. We have all these wars that it looks like we're losing. We no longer have the greatness anymore. We don't have a southern border. It's being overwhelmed. It doesn't. What does it even mean to be an American anymore? This is just an economic zone. We huge deficit. No one knows how we're going to pay for all this. There's a day of reckoning coming, and there's just like no answer. It's like this cliff is happening. We could see he's coming. We're driving full speed to the cliff, and everyone's like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Cities, crime is out of control. It's just on and on and on that we see the crumbling. And now, just recently, Donald Trump being taken off the ballot because of insurrection. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. We're going into a banana republic phase. So there's been a lot of talk, and not just in extreme circles, you radicals, about a national divorce or another civil war. And people are talking about it not as a bad thing, like something has to be done. And this has become so mainstream. There is a movie coming out next year called Civil War 2024. And the blurb is, in the near future, a team of journalists travel across the United States during a rapidly escalating civil war that has engulfed the entire nation. And I saw a trailer. You can watch the trailer, and it says that 19 states secede from the Union, something called the Western Forces, and they fight against like Washington D.C. I don't know. I'm sure it'll have the wrong message. I would be rooting for the Western Forces. Anyone against Washington D.C., I'm on that side. That's no question. So I'm sure the movie though won't share my politics. But it's interesting how such a movie could even be made. That people are discussing this in a serious manner. People, I think, can feel things are breaking apart. But the problem is how would this really work? And I don't have the answer. There's a couple of different models, but let's talk about a Civil War model. And we basically have already had two civil wars in the United States. I know most people think we just had one, the one in 1860 through 65, but there, I consider the Revolutionary War, if you call that, it wasn't really a revolution. We didn't overthrow the king. It was really a civil war because we were part of Britain and we rebelled, we seceded. So I consider that really the first Civil War. So I think it's instructive to look back at these past civil wars to see what allowed that to happen. So could we have a civil war like we had in the 1860s or we had in the 1770s? Is that possible? And I just don't see it because the structure is radically different. And it's sort of complex, but just to kind of boil it down, what we call the American Civil War, or the war between the states, as it was called, which I think is more descriptive. It really was a war between the states, where states prior to our American Civil War, they had almost all the power. The federal government had very little power. And so states, they had their own militias, and people, because of technology wasn't as what we have today with transportation, typically people were born in the state, lived in the state, and died in the state. They had their families there. They had roots in the state. And they would think of themselves first as being a person from the state, then an American. And Robert E. Lee was that way. He considered himself first a Virginian, not an American. That's why he sided with the Confederacy, because his state, Virginia, went with the Confederacy, and he went to West Point. He was an American officer, but he said, well, my loyalty is to Virginia, my state. we don't really have that anymore. People just hop around all different states. I mean, like myself, I've lived in Colorado. I was born in Illinois. I've lived in Colorado. I've lived in Michigan. I've lived in Oklahoma. Now I'm in Arkansas. And I don't think I'm that unusual. A lot of people have moved around. So, really, what is your state? And states now don't have the power that they used to have. It's not like there's an Arkansas militia that Sarah Huckabee could call out to fight the federal government. It's just not plausible that would ever happen. So take the reddest state, the most state that hates Washington the most. There's just no way. There's just no political will to try to somehow form an army to fight Washington. And it sounds like this is what they were talking about in this movie coming out, Civil War 2024, about the states get together called the Western, what do they call it? The Western Front or something like that. Western forces are getting together 19 states to fight Washington. I just don't see how that would come together in any sort of way based on how the country is structured at this point. And the other issue is it's not really we like to say red states and blue states, red states Republican, blue states Democrat, like California, they're a bunch of stupid liberals, but here in Arkansas we're red, we're traditional American values. Well, not really. I mean, yeah, but it depends what part of the state. And I would argue that I'm in rural Arkansas. I have probably more in common with someone that lives in rural California than I do with someone that lives in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is a liberal city. So it's not really based on states. It's almost, if you want to do the divide, is between the cities and the rural areas. So it's yeah, you could say California is a blue state and Arkansas is a red state, but it's not like how all the people are. And you see that especially like in the South, because the South still has a huge black population, but they're pretty much red states. It's not because the blacks vote Republican. They don't. They almost all vote Democrat. It's just that the whites in the South tend to be more racially aware and they vote Republican. But this idea, like all of a sudden the South will rise up and somehow take on Washington with armies, just seems ridiculous. I don't see how that would happen. So I'm not sure how the mechanics would work where we would have a war between the states. And if you go back to the first Civil War, what we call the Revolutionary War, it was kind of a similar situation. You had the colonies, and the colonies, they had their own militia, and they were far away from Britain. And remember, this was in 1770s when the ocean and the transportation was slow. So it wasn't that easy to move across the ocean. I mean, it was done, but you pretty much were on your own here in America. And the colonies started to have their own militias and they had their own governments and they became separate from Britain. They were a different people and we developed our own elite. And the war against Britain was mostly because you had some of the elite, like George Washington. He wasn't just like some little farmer. He was powerful in Virginia, the most powerful state back then. And John Adams was really influential in Massachusetts. So you had a lot of the elite that were fighting the elite in Britain for various reasons. And so they were able to raise an army here in the States against Britain. And we would have lost that war. We pretty much lost every battle of the war. But then at the end, because of France, France got in and sort of saved the day. And Britain, they were more concerned about France anyway than messing with us. Plus, there was some politics in Britain, the Whigs. They didn't really want to fight the war with the colonies. So everything just came together perfect. So we got our independence. But it wasn't like we like to think of the movie The Patriot, just some humble farmer man gets pissed off about the British and he picks up his rifle and it spreads across the nation and we drive the British out. Well, that's a nice romantic theory, but it's just not what happened. We had a lot of powerful people in the United States that were elite. They had a lot of political connections. They were the ones who were able to raise a militia. Same with the Confederacy. It wasn't like a bunch of people in the South all of a sudden got together. It was their leaders. It was like Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, that were well educated. They were pretty famous. They served in the United States Army. They had a division. And so, because of that, there could be a traditional civil war between armies. Now, you can say, okay, but it's not going to be that type of civil war. It's going to be like a guerrilla civil war. But how does that work? Because pretty soon it just becomes like a terrorist organization. Yeah, you could get together with some of your friends, maybe underground, and shoot some people you think are the enemy. But is that really going to change the government? I don't think so. I remember there was a group, it's like a white nationalist group or something in the 80s called The Order, Jay Matthews and David Lane. I didn't know much about this, but their idea, we'll start this group and we will overthrow the establishment. And they robbed some banks and they killed some people, but they were all destroyed. It didn't make any changes. And I don't know of any example where just a grassroots effort, somehow everyone gets together and bands together and overthrows the system. I just don't know any examples of that. Maybe it has. And this is something I'm going to study throughout the world, but I don't think it's happened in America. The other model, which could actually be more likely, is what happened in Rome, and it happened in France, and it happened in Germany, which I call the Great Leader, where it isn't so much a traditional civil war. Like Julius Caesar, there was a civil war, but it was between generals. It was a different system. The soldiers, they had their loyalty to the general, not to Rome. And so the generals fought, and then the republic ended, and Caesar became the emperor, Julius Caesar. But again, it wasn't from the bottom up. He was a very powerful general, and he was able to radically change the system. Napoleon, that happened after the French Revolution. You had the Reign of Terror, but he didn't come out of nowhere. He was in the army or in artillery. He became a general. He was powerful, and he got some into the politics, and he took control of France. Hitler, you could say the same way. It wasn't like the National Socialist Nazis. They had like terror cells where they took over by terrorism. No, I mean, they just put out their message and they won an election. People liked the message and they were democratically elected. But those were strong men that really reshaped the nation. And again, that could be more of a realistic thing that would happen. And I think that's why they're scared of Trump. Not that I think he would do it, but a lot of people would support a strong man coming into the United States and saying, hey, this is what's happening now. We can't have anymore. We need someone to really clear house. And the left has they have the motto, by any means necessary. We need to have that motto. And we got to clear house. And it requires a strong man to get in. But again, would the army be loyal to someone that like Trump that did that? I don't know. This is part of the issue why Biden and the regime, they're trying to get rid of white men and Christians from the army because they don't trust the army necessarily. So I'm not sure what model it would happen that a civil war would happen or a national divorce. And believe me, I think that we need a breakup. It's intolerable, the situation we have now. But I just don't know the mechanics of, I understand where we are now. And I understand where we want to have self-determination, but how do we get there? And I don't see the states getting together when the states are divided internally and there's just not the will. And maybe we could have the strong leader come in and take over and set things right. But that would be tricky too, because all of the institutions are controlled by the enemy, as we saw when Trump was in his first term. What would be the process of him getting in and disbanding, overthrowing like all these legal rulings and say, we don't give a fuck what you ruled on. You're no longer judge, and just, clear house. I don't see that easily happening. So how America will break apart, I think it will. I'm just not quite sure of the mechanics yet. And that's something I think we need to explore a little bit more. I need to explore a little bit more. I want to think about this more, how it will happen. But the idea that we're going to have a battle between the states or a national divorce anytime soon, why I could see in a sense I could support that because this is an intolerable situation now. I just don't know how that would work. All right, just some thoughts for today, guys. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you guys later.